If you want to be a digital nomad therapist and travel the world while seeing the patients you love, one of the first things you should consider is how to be legally compliant while traveling. Now, this is really important because not only do you have business things to consider, but you also have a license that allows you to do the work that you're doing. And I would definitely not want you to somehow jeopardize your business or your licensure just because you maybe didn't know that it's something you should consider, or you were maybe too afraid to look at it and just decided to wing it. In this video, I'm going to talk through some of the major legal considerations and things that you want to check through before you pack your bags and book that flight. But I do just want to say that I'm not a lawyer, and I'm definitely not your lawyer, and this is not legal advice. And so I would recommend seeking legal advice if there's any concerns or anything that comes up, just so you know that you're safe. Hi, I'm Dr. Annie. I am a psychologist and a digital nomad therapist. For the last year and a half, I have been traveling the world while running my US-based private practice. I feel really passionate about helping therapists build the remote private practice that allows them to travel the world while still seeing patients they love within the United States. And if that's you, definitely hit like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you. So the first thing you want to consider is any licensure or location-based regulations that are for your state and your specific license. It's kind of common knowledge that it's really important that you're only seeing patients that are based in the states that you are licensed, but a little bit grayer of an area is where you can be located while offering that service. The main idea that I think a lot of people have is that you, as the provider, can be anywhere in the world as long as your clients are in the state that you're licensed. But I think this isn't always true, and this I think is just kind of a generalization. The most important thing for you to do is to look into your laws and regulations of the licensure you have in the states that you are licensed. And if you can't find anything in the laws and regulations, I would highly recommend sending an email to your licensing board, just making sure that there aren't going to be any issues with you not being within the United States while providing services under your license. Some states within the US can be a lot stricter, and so you definitely don't want to just go off of the main generalization that you should be fine as long as your clients are in the state you're licensed. So I would definitely recommend not skipping this step. There's no way I'd want you to lose your license because you're not following the regulations of your licensing board. Now, if your state does for some reason have regulations about where you're located, something to consider is maybe checking into states that aren't as restrictive. I know that can be a little bit tricky when it comes to marketing and getting clients in those states, but if you're really serious about being a digital nomad therapist and living abroad, I think it's definitely worth the long-term investment, because there are definitely states where they do not have regulations about where you're based. And so it's definitely possible, even if the state you're licensed in has restrictions, there's a way around that by getting licensed in other states. The second thing you need to consider is the laws and regulations of the country that you're traveling to or that you will be based in. This can impact you in a couple of different ways. I know there's a lot of people who might have the idea that they can move to a specific country and work as a therapist in that country for the residents or maybe expats that are residing in that country. But this is not as clear cut as a lot of people may assume it might be. When you go to another country and you want to provide services, your licensure in the States obviously does not apply, and oftentimes you have to even go through that country's education system to be able to be eligible for the license that they might require in that country. If you want to be able to fully move to another country and relocate there and work from that country, you definitely want to start early in terms of researching what it might require. I think obviously the easiest thing to do would just be to virtually see your patients in the United States within the state that you're licensed, if your state allows you to be abroad. If you are invested in moving to another country long term, it might be worth going through the hoops that they require. But I would definitely just look online and research what maybe requirements they have for you to be able to see people under a mental health license. The other thing that is important to consider when you're in another country is if they have any requirements for you working in their country. Now, there's a lot of countries that say, okay, if you're coming here under a tourist visa and you're going to be working, but the work that you're doing is for a foreign-based country where your customers or whoever are outside of that country you're residing. So let's say for me, my company is a US-based company and all of my money that I'm making is from customers in the United States. There are a lot of countries who really want digital nomads to come to their countries, and so it's something that they legally allow even under a tourist visa. The main issue arises is when you are starting to see nationals of that country or you're starting to generate revenue within that country. So let's say like I'm headed to Thailand next week and I'm in Thailand for 6 months and there's someone that really needs some type of services that I can offer them, and I render those business services in Thailand for someone in Thailand. That's when there are going to be a lot more legal regulations, and I would probably need to considering getting a work visa or a work permit in Thailand. Now, there are some countries that require you to get a work permit even if you are working remotely for a foreign-based country. And so this is definitely something that you want to look into when you're traveling to certain countries. Now, online, when you read a lot of, even if they do have regulations, it's a gray area as to if they enforce them or they actually have any type of fine. But I would say you would be better safe than sorry in making sure that you're following any regulation, because you wouldn't want to get deported from that country, and especially if it's a country you like visiting, you don't want to potentially jeopardize your ability to go back to that country. So something you can do is definitely do your own research, but you also can reach out to any kind of lawyers or check with maybe some visa agencies, things like that, just to make sure you are compliant in terms of being able to work in that country under a tourist visa. And then I think maybe if you're a resident, there are obviously probably going to be different regulations. So whatever visa or permit that you're getting to be in that country, you definitely want to make sure that you're safe in terms of what you can do under that visa. Now, a solution to this is to specifically get a digital nomad visa for the country you're going to. These tend to be a little bit more complicated in terms of the application and tend to be more expensive, and so they might not be for countries that you only want to go to for 30 days or something like that. But like if you wanted to go and stay extended period of time, there are a lot of places that have digital nomad visas that then you wouldn't even have to worry about it. So that's definitely something to consider and look into. The third thing that you want to make sure you're compliant with or that you're looking into are insurance and liability policies. As I'm sure most of you know, to practice in the United States, you need to have some type of insurance and liability coverage. You want to make sure your malpractice insurance covers you while you are residing outside of the United States. Making sure that they offer international coverage for therapists, especially if you start to venture into the territory of seeing patients that are outside of the United States. You want to make sure that you are covered for that as well. This is a pretty simple fix. All you need to do is just give them a call and make sure that the policy you have covers you. And then if it doesn't, there are malpractice insurance companies that do cover you while you're outside of the United States. So it's not something that should stop you from being able to do this. It's just a fix of just getting insured by another company. The fourth thing you want to consider is your electronic health system and any other HIPAA compliance issues. Given that you're working online, some of the electronic health system have restrictions on where you can be while you are providing the services. So let's say you want to access their electronic health system while in another country. Some of these companies say that that goes against their terms and policies. And the main concern here is that if you are going against the terms and policies of that company, you could be considered making a HIPAA violation by accessing that system outside of the United States. And I think the big thing that I at least understand from this is that I guess these companies don't want to be liable for other countries that have maybe less restrictive online or internet or information policies, how they use the internet or the information, I guess I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. But you know what I mean. You definitely want to make sure that your electronic health system is one that allows you to be outside of the United States without going against their terms and policies or whatever they're called. And I forgot to say, I think the biggest problem with this is that if you are going against their terms and policies, I think the idea is your insurance might not be able to cover you because you are going against that company's policies. And so if you were ever to have a file made against you or someone were to sue you or whatever, you might not have coverage from your liability insurance. So it's definitely not something you want to mess around with. Some other HIPAA compliance things you want to consider is, obviously, since you're not in the States, you might need a online phone system. And so you just want to make sure the online phone system you have is HIPAA compliant. And then if you're ever accessing the internet while abroad, it might be safe to just generally have a VPN, which will kind of protect you from people trying to steal your data or get into your information. But also that is most especially important if you're ever accessing like a public internet source. So let's say you're at a hostel and there's kind of a shared internet, or you're at like an Airbnb that has shared internet among guests. You definitely want to make sure you're using a VPN. Definitely look into getting a VPN. I personally have Surfshark. I don't have any problems with it, but there's definitely probably other options you can look into. The one caveat I will say is that if you are using Wi-Fi and you're using a VPN and there's any issues with that Wi-Fi, sometimes the issue can be the fact that you're using a VPN. So you just need to disconnect from the VPN, connect to the Wi-Fi, and then start the VPN again. And then there should be no issue. The fifth thing you want to consider is if you're ever on an insurance panel. There are some insurance companies that don't allow you to be outside of the United States while rendering services. You definitely want to make sure before you leave the country that if you are on insurances, to email that insurance and confirm with them in writing that you are legally able to be outside of the United States while providing services. I think some of them allow you to and some of them don't, but you definitely don't want to not check and then be outside of the United States and somehow they find out and then somehow you have to pay back that money they paid you for the services you were providing. That would obviously be so stressful and awful. So definitely check before you leave the country. The next thing you want to consider are any ethical considerations and your informed consent. I think the biggest thing for this is, obviously, since you're not going to be seeing your people in person, you want to make sure that you're considering all the ethical things that might go along with seeing someone remotely. Now, I think this applies to anyone who is virtually seeing a patient, so not just if you're abroad. But one of the big things is if you have any sort of patient with risk, you want to make sure you have a plan for if there's an emergency that happens or there is some kind of heightened risk with that patient. You obviously want to know what the emergency services are in that patient's location. Something that I do is that with every patient that I have them fill out an emergency plan, identifying what their nearest hospital is, kind of some of their emergency contact, and just some local agencies that they would want to be contacted if something were to happen in terms of like suicidal or any other type of risk like that. And that is just so I know what their preferences are, but it also gives me a heads up as to like maybe what resources are in that community. So that's something you can do, but obviously you need to make sure that you know what resources there are if there are any risks. And obviously when you're remote, that's a little bit trickier than if you're only seeing people in person, because you obviously kind of have a sense of what the resources are in that local community because you're in that local community. So definitely don't skip this step, and especially if you see kind of a higher risk population, like people with suicidal ideation or people with eating disorders or children. And then I think every state might have a different regulation around the kind of informed informed consent that you need in terms of telehealth, but it, I think, could be really good general practice just to have information about telehealth within your informed consent and any restrictions that telehealth can have in terms of the services, but also just making sure it's clear that maybe if there is an emergency that happens, they know who to call and that you're not someone who's available 24/7, things like that. You just want to make sure it's clear within the informed consent that the person knows that they're engaging in telehealth, what might come along with that. And then the last is just making sure that you're clear with any taxes or business logistic. Now, taxes can be a little bit tricky if you're living abroad, like if you have claimed residency in another country. The important thing you need to know as a US citizen is that regardless of where you're living in the world and regardless of your residency status, even if you have claimed residency in another country, you will always be liable for taxes within the United States. You will always need to file a tax return regardless of where you are, especially if you're running a US-based business, obviously, but it's definitely not something you can get out of even if you move to another country. You know, you'll see a lot of expats, US expats talking about that, but it's definitely something for you to know. But I would highly recommend reaching out to your accountant or getting established with an accountant just to make sure that you're being safe when it comes to taxes and not making any mistakes in terms of what business expenses can you expense, things like that, when traveling outside the United States. And then obviously if you ever, if you are residing in another country and you do decide to do business with in that country, you just want to make sure you don't need to file that business within the country you're in, things like that. You just want to be really safe with that because you wouldn't want to get kind of penalized for whatever reason. Okay, those are all of the legal considerations that I have for you today. If you have any questions or anything, definitely leave them down in the comments. I can give you and share my wisdom that I have, but obviously I am limited because I am not an accountant or a legal expert or anything like that. This is just kind of what I've learned along the way and doing my own research. And so definitely do your own research and check with experts. But I hope this video was helpful in giving just kind of a framework of the things that you want to be considering in terms of being legally compliant while running a practice with the United States and traveling the world. Don't let this stop you. There are definitely ways to do this, and it's not something that will prohibit you. I think there's a lot of people who think that you can't do it, and so don't even look into it. But that is definitely not the case, and so I hope that I definitely helped you see that there are possibilities for you to be able to do this. I do offer business coaching for therapists who are wanting to become digital nomad therapists. If you're interested in getting on one-on-one support, definitely check out the link below for my Everbee coaching website. But otherwise, I hope you like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.